The first violation notice was for a trash can. Not the can itself, but its position. It was 4 inches too far from the curb, they said. A glossy, pre-printed slip in a plastic sleeve, tucked into my front door handle. I laughed, tossed it in the recycling, and thought nothing of it. That was my mistake. Because I didn't understand that Brenda from 3 doors down, the new HOA president, wasn't enforcing rules. She was conducting a campaign. And my house was ground zero. By the time I got to notice number 53, the one about the unapproved psychological dissonance of my front door color, the laughter was long gone. All that was left was a cold, focused rage. And that's when I decided to stop playing defense. I was going to learn her rules better than she did. And I was going to find the one that would burn her perfect little kingdom to the ground. Maple Crest Estates wasn't supposed to be a war zone. It was supposed to be peace. A quiet, tree-lined cul-de-sac suburb where my wife, Sarah, and I could finally catch our breath after years in a noisy apartment. The houses were nice, not mansions but solid. The HOA fees were reasonable, the covenant seemed standard. Keep your lawn tidy, no radical exterior changes without approval, park in your driveway. Basic stuff. I'd skimmed the 50-page document at closing, signed it, and filed it away, thinking of it as a formality, like the terms of service for a neighborhood. Brenda lived at 4221, the house with the impeccable hedges cut at a perfect 90-degree angle, the driveway that looked vacuumed, and the fluttering American flag that was probably measured daily for correct dimensions. She was in her late 50s, with a helmet of blonde hair and a smile that never touched her eyes. She introduced herself the week we moved in with a basket of welcome, muffins, and a copy of the HOA bylaws highlighted. "We just love maintaining standards here," she'd said, her voice syrupy sweet. "It protects everyone's investment." The trash can notice was week 2. Then came the unsanctioned garden gnome notice. It was a frog statue Sarah's mom gave us. Then the lawn mowed in a non-uniform pattern notice. Each notice came with a fine. $25.
$50.
It was petty cash, but it was the principle. I'd go to the monthly HOA meetings, held in Brenda's spotless living room. I'd try to reason. "Brenda, the gnome is 6 inches tall. It's not visible from the street." She'd peer over her reading glasses, the binder of violations open before her like a sacred text. The covenant, Section 4, Paragraph B, states, all lawn ornaments, statuary, or decorative fixtures require prior architectural committee approval. You did not seek approval. The fine stands. The other board members, a retired man named Carl and a nervous woman named Patricia, would just nod along. Brenda had turned the HOA from a maintenance collective into a personal fiefdom. Her weapon was the letter of the law, and she wielded it with gleeful precision. Complaints piled up. Old Mr. Henderson got fined because his newspaper was delivered to his porch instead of his mailbox. The young couple with the newborn got fined because their baby's portable containment unit, a playpen, was visible on the patio for 20 minutes. The neighborhood lived in a low-grade state of fear, a fear of Brenda's laser eyes spotting a stray leaf or a faded patio cushion. I tried to comply. I became obsessive. I measure my grass with a ruler. I power wash my driveway weekly. It didn't matter. The notices kept coming. For excessive bird feeder activity. For holiday wreath left up 48 hours past the sanctioned removal date. The fines escalated. They were no longer just nuisance fees. They were a financial harassment tactic. Sarah begged me to just pay them, to not rock the boat. But the boat wasn't just rocking. Brenda was drilling holes in the hull, smiling while she did it. Notice number 53 was the breaking point. My front door was a deep navy blue. It had been that color when we bought the house. The notice claimed it created visual psychological dissonance with the community's earth tone palette and was therefore a violation. They demanded I repaint it an approved color within 10 days or face a daily fine of $100. That's when I knew. This wasn't about rules. This was a shakedown. She wanted me gone. I paid the fine for the door. I painted it a dreadful, approved shade of beige. But as the brush slapped on the first coat, something in me broke open. Not into anger, but into a cold, clear strategy. If Brenda's power was the rulebook, then the rulebook was where I would fight. I wasn't going to argue about gnomes or grass length anymore. I was going to become an expert. That night, I dug out the full HOA covenant, conditions and restrictions, the CC and RS, 54 pages of dense, dry, terrifyingly specific legalese. I started reading it like it was the most fascinating novel ever written. I highlighted, made notes, cross-referenced. I learned about aesthetic uniformity, quiet enjoyment, and architectural review committees. I learned that fines could be levied, but they had to be reasonable and directly tied to the cost of remediation. Brenda's $100 a day fine for my door was likely unenforceable, but challenging it would cost more in legal fees. I needed a different angle. I started looking beyond the HOA rules to the laws that govern the HOA itself. I spent nights on county clerk websites, reading state statutes about homeowners associations. I learned about their required financial disclosures, their meeting minutes, their election procedures. I filed formal, written requests with the HOA board, now just Brenda, Carl, and Patricia, for copies of all budgets, financial statements, and fine revenue records for the past 5 years. I cited the state law that gave me, as a member, the right to see them. Brenda's response was a masterpiece of bureaucratic obstruction. She sent a letter stating the request was overly broad and would incur administrative retrieval fees of $200. I paid it. I was investing now. The documents arrived in a shabby cardboard box. They were a mess, incomplete, with handwritten notes in the margins, years mixed together. It reeked of amateur hour. As I sorted through them, a pattern emerged. The HOA's operating account was healthy, swollen with all our monthly dues and fine revenue. But there was a separate, smaller ledger for special assessments and legal reserves. The math didn't add up. Large, round number withdrawals were marked legal, with no case numbers or explanations. Fines were recorded, but the amounts deposited didn't always match. It was sloppy, possibly fraudulent. I took my findings to Carl, the retired board member, catching him as he washed his car. He was a timid man, a former accountant. I showed him the discrepancies. "Carl, this looks bad. If this ever got audited," he palmed, looking over his shoulder toward Brenda's house. "You don't understand, son. Brenda, she handles the books. She says it's fine. But you're on the board. You're legally responsible, too." He just shook his head, fear in his eyes. "I just want a quiet life. Don't stir this up." I was on my own. But I had a new target, the HOA's financial integrity. If Brenda was embezzling, even just cutting corners, that was a path to removing her. But it was a messy, public path, and proving it would be a hell of a fight. Then, buried in the state statutes one bleary-eyed night at 2 a.m., I found it. A single, beautiful line. It wasn't an HOA rule. It was a state property law governing the creation and powers of all common interest communities, which included HOAs. Section 118.7. Notwithstanding any provisions in the association's governing documents, any member of the association who is more than 90 days delinquent in the payment of any regular or special assessment levied by the association shall be considered in default. The association may, after notice and hearing, initiate foreclosure proceedings on the member's property to satisfy the debt. My mind raced. The HOA could foreclose on a homeowner for unpaid dues or fines. That was the hammer Brenda had been holding over all of us. But the law worked both ways. It bound the association, and by extension, its officers, to the same financial covenant with the community. A wild, dangerous idea began to form. What if Brenda, the HOA president, was herself delinquent on her HOA dues? What if she was in default? The association could foreclose on her house. The poetic justice was almost too perfect. But it was a fantasy. Brenda was the collector. She would never let her own payments lapse. Or would she? I went back to the financial records. I looked for her account. Homeowner 4221. Brenshaw, Brenda. The entries were neat, unlike the others. Payments received on the first of every month, like clockwork. For 3 years. And then 8 months ago, they stopped. The ledger showed a balance. A growing, unpaid balance for HOA dues. 8 months of non-payment. Over $2,000 owed. I stared at the numbers, my heart pounding. It made no sense. She was fanatical about rules. Why would she stop paying? Was it an oversight? Arrogance? Or was she simply skimming the dues from the account and not recording her own, knowing no one would ever check? This was it. This was the crack in her foundation. But a balance in a messy ledger wasn't proof. I needed an official, undeniable record of her delinquency. And I knew exactly where to get it. The next morning, I put on a suit I hadn't worn since my last job interview. I drove downtown to the county clerk's office. I walked past the marble columns and the buzzing fluorescent lights to the records department. I approached the clerk, my palms sweaty. "I need to see the property records for a parcel in the Maple Crest Estates subdivision," I said, trying to keep my voice even. Specifically, I need to see the lien history and any notices of default filed with the county. The clerk, an older woman with kind eyes, nodded and tapped on her keyboard. She asked for the address. I gave it to her. 4221, Brenda's house. As she pulled up the file and turned the screen toward me, my breath caught. There, amid the tax records and the original deed, was a document filed 6 months prior. It was a notice of lien for unpaid assessments, filed by the Maple Crest Estates Homeowners Association against its own president. So, the HOA had officially declared her in default. But if she controlled the HOA, why would she file a lien against herself? Unless she didn't know about it. Unless someone else had done it. But who?
And why?
The game just got infinitely more complicated. What do you think this means? Let me know your theory in the comments. And subscribe for part next, where I follow this paper trail into a shadow war happening right under our manicured lawns. The notice of lien on the county clerk's screen was a ghost. A piece of paper filed by a phantom. According to the stamp, it had been submitted 6 months ago by the Maple Crest Estates HOA, demanding payment from Brenda Brenshaw for delinquent dues. But Brenda was the HOA. She signed the checks. She controlled the records. So who had walked into this very office and filed a legal claim against her? I stared at the filing number, a cold thrill cutting through my confusion. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a secret. And in a neighborhood ruled by petty tyranny, a secret is the most powerful weapon of all. I paid the clerk for a certified copy of the lien. The paper felt heavy, official. It listed the legal description of Brenda's property, the amount owed, $2,150 plus accruing fees, and it was signed. The signature was a messy scrawl, but the typed name beneath it was clear. Carl J. Miller.
Carl.
The retired accountant, the timid board member who washed his car and wanted a quiet life. He had filed this. Without Brenda's knowledge. My mind raced, trying to reconstruct the timeline. According to the HOA's own messy ledger, Brenda stopped paying 8 months ago. Carl filed the lien 6 months ago. That meant for 2 months, he'd watched the debt grow. He had access to the same books I'd seen.
He'd known.
And instead of telling her, instead of covering for her, he'd taken the nuclear option. He'd made it legal, public record.
Why?
Revenge? A silent rebellion? A guilty conscience trying to force her hand? Whatever the reason, Carl had handed me a live grenade and then walked away, whistling. I couldn't confront him directly. If he was this deep in the shadows, spooking him would make him vanish or, worse, run to Brenda. I had to be smarter. I started watching Carl. Not in a creepy way, just noting. He was always home. He walked his dog at the same time every evening. He avoided Brenda's house like it was quarantined. A few days later, I saw my chance. He was struggling to lift a bag of mulch from his trunk.
You walked over?
Need a hand, Carl? He jumped, startled.
Oh. No.
No, I've got it. He grunted, hauling the bag out. Tough job for one, I said, grabbing one end. Let me help. We carried it to his backyard. His garden was immaculate, but in a nervous, overtended way. Everything was in rigid rows. Thanks, he muttered, not meeting my eye. You haven't stirred up any more trouble with the board, have you?
Me?
No, I said, brushing dirt off my hands. Just trying to keep my head down. It's getting expensive. I paused, then went for it. I was down at the county clerk's office the other day, getting some records for a refinance. Saw something weird. Carl froze, a trowel hovering over a petunia bed.
Oh, yeah. Saw a lien filed by our HOA.
Against a property in the neighborhood. He didn't move. That's private association business. It's public record once it's filed, Carl. I kept my tone casual, conversational. The weird part was the address. 4221. The trowel clattered to the flagstone. Carl's face went ashen. He slowly straightened up, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He looked old and terrified. You saw it. I did. You filed it. He nodded, a jerky, miserable motion. He gestured to 2 weathered lawn chairs.
Seat.
It wasn't an offer. It was a surrender. We sat in the shadow of his perfect garage. She stopped paying, he began, his voice a dry whisper. Just stopped. I asked her about it once, just hey, Brenda, your payment didn't post this month. She looked at me like I'd accused her of murder. Said it was a clerical error on my part, that she'd handle it. But it never posted. Month after month. The ledger, you saw it. It's a fiction. She's been taking the cash from the dues for years, Leo. Skimming a little here, a little there. Paying for legal expenses that don't exist. I'm an accountant, or I was. I know cooked books when I see them. He took a shuddering breath. When she stopped paying her own dues, it was like she'd finally crossed a line in her own mind. She believed she was above the rules. The rules she uses to torture everyone else. I couldn't take it anymore. The fear in this neighborhood. The fines. The way she talks about people. So I did the one thing I knew would be permanent. I followed the bylaws. I filed the notice of delinquency, then the lien. It's all in the procedure manual. She never reads it. She just enforces the part she likes. But she's the president, I said. Won't she just have the board vote to remove the lien? Carl let out a short, bitter laugh. The board? You mean me and Patricia? Patricia is so scared of Brenda, she jumps if her phone rings. Brenda doesn't know about the lien, Leo. That's the thing. She never goes to the county clerk's office. Why would she? She thinks she controls everything from her living room. The lien just sits there, accruing. It's a ticking clock. After a year of delinquency, the HOA has the right to initiate foreclosure proceedings. That's in the state law you found, and it's in our covenants. She's 9 months in. The sheer, audacious simplicity of it was breathtaking. Carl hadn't fought her. He hadn't argued. He just quietly, meticulously, used her own system to tie a noose around her neck and then walked away, waiting for her to step off the chair. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I'm a coward, he said, his eyes filling with shameful tears. I filed it, but I can't see it through. I can't be the one to push it to foreclosure. The confrontation, it would kill me. But you're already at war with her. You have the anger, I don't. You have the right. He was passing me the baton. The responsibility. The weapon. What do you need me to do? My voice was calm. The strategy was crystallizing. The lien is the first step, Carl explained, wiping his eyes, composing himself. The next step is a notice of intent to foreclose. It has to be sent by certified mail to the homeowner, giving them a final 30-day cure period. Then, if the debt isn't paid, the HOA can file a foreclosure lawsuit. I have the forms. I've had them for months. I just couldn't send them. He went inside and came back with a thin folder. Inside were official-looking forms, templates downloaded from a legal website, already filled out with Brenda's information and the lien number. All they needed was the HOA's authorizing signature. The president can't sign a foreclosure notice against herself, I said. No, Carl agreed. But according to the bylaws, if the president is the subject of a conflict of interest, the vice president can act. That's me. I can sign it. I will sign it. I'll put it in the mail. But you have to be the one to make sure it lands. You have to be the one to ensure she doesn't weasel out of it when she gets it. You have to be the one to force the final vote if it comes to that.
It was a pact.
Carl would provide the legal machinery from within. I would provide the relentless pressure from without. Together, we would use the HOA's own rules to evict its dictator. I took the folder. Okay. There's one more thing, Carl said, his voice dropping even lower. The financial skimming. I have a separate file. Bank statements, withdrawal records, my own notes. It's not enough for criminal charges, probably, but it's enough for civil court. For a lawsuit from the homeowners. If the foreclosure doesn't work, or if you need more leverage. I now had two weapons, the procedural sledgehammer of foreclosure and the toxic threat of financial exposure. Brenda had built her kingdom on fear and rules. We were going to use those exact same materials to bury her. The notice of intent to foreclose went out via certified mail the next day, signed by Carl as vice president. I tracked the delivery online. It was scheduled for delivery to 4221 Maple Crest Drive in 2 days. The clock on her 30-day cure period was about to start. The question was, what would Brenda do when she opened it? The delivery day arrived. From my living room window, I watched the postal truck stop at Brenda's house. I saw her open the door, accept the small stack of mail. She flipped through it, stopped at the certified letter, and tore it open right there on her pristine porch. I saw her body go rigid. The paper trembled in her hand. She looked up, her gaze sweeping the street like a searchlight, and for a terrifying second, her eyes locked directly onto my window. She couldn't possibly see me through the glare, but I felt seen. She knew. She crumpled the letter in her fist, turned on her heel, and slammed her door so hard the wreath jumped. The war was no longer cold. It was officially declared. So, what do you think her first move will be? Will she come screaming to my door? Will she try to strong-arm Carl? Or does she have a hidden move of her own? The battle for Maple Crest Estates begins in part next. Subscribe to see what happens when a petty tyrant realizes the rules apply to her. 2. Brenda didn't come screaming to my door. She didn't confront Carl. Her silence was more terrifying than any outburst. For 3 days, Maple Crest was eerily quiet. No violation notices fluttered on any doors. The neighborhood held its breath. Then, on the 4th day, I found the envelope. It wasn't on my door. It was tucked under the windshield wiper of my car. Thick, legal-sized. Inside was not an HOA fine. It was a formal summons. I was being sued by the Maple Crest Estates Homeowners Association for defamation, intentional interference with contractual relations, and creating a hostile living environment. The demanded damages?
$52,000.
She hadn't tried to fight the foreclosure notice. She decided to bury me under a lawsuit instead. The lawsuit was a masterstroke of distraction and intimidation. By suing me personally, Brenda shifted the battlefield. The foreclosure process on her house was a slow, procedural grind. This lawsuit against me was a sudden, immediate financial crisis. Her goal was clear: make the fight so expensive and painful for me that I'd drop everything, including the foreclosure threat, just to make it go away. The summons listed the HOA as the plaintiff, with Brenda as the authorized representative. The claims were laughably flimsy. Defamation for suggesting financial irregularities. Interference for talking to other homeowners about the lien. Hostile environment for my aggressive compliance with HOA rules. It was a classic slap suit, a strategic lawsuit against public participation, designed to silence critics, not to win in court. But fighting it, even to get it dismissed, would cost thousands I didn't have. My wife, Sarah, was in a panic. Leo, we have to settle. We can't afford this. Just apologize, pay some small fine, and let it go. But I knew an apology wouldn't end it. It would be a surrender, and Brenda would own us forever. I was trapped. Carl's secret weapon was a long fuse bomb. Brenda's lawsuit was a gun to my head right now. I needed a lawyer, but I had no money for a retainer. In desperation, I called every legal aid office in the county. Finally, I got a referral to a young attorney named Maya Rodriguez who specialized in property law and had a noted dislike for abusive HOAs. I met her in her modest office. The lawsuit papers spread between us. She read them quickly, a smirk playing on her lips. "This is garbage," she said bluntly. "Transparent intimidation. But to get it dismissed, we have to file an anti-slap motion. That's work. And while it's penned in, it's a cloud over your head, your credit, your peace of mind. She's betting you'll fold before we even get a court date." "What's the move?" I asked, feeling desperate. Maya leaned back, steepling her fingers. "We don't play defense. We go nuclear. We file a cross-complaint. We sue the HOA back. And we name Brenda Brenshaw, individually, as a defendant." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that she has been operating the HOA as a fraudulent enterprise for personal gain. We allege breach of fiduciary duty, financial malfeasance, and harassment. We use the financial records Carl gave you as Exhibit A. We demand not just dismissal of her suit, but monetary damages from her personally and her immediate removal from the HOA board." It was an escalation that made my head spin. "But that's a bigger fight. More money." "Not necessarily," Maya countered. "We file it pro se at first, with you as your own representation, to show the court the counterclaims. It's messy, but it signals we won't be bullied. More importantly, it changes the narrative. It makes her the defendant in a fraud case. It might scare her into dropping her suit to avoid discovery. And," she added with a sharp smile, "it ties directly into the foreclosure. A board member under indictment for fraud can't very well argue she's being unfairly foreclosed on for unpaid dues, can she?" It was a high-risk, high-reward gambit. I had to trust Carl's records and my own research. I agreed. Maya helped me draft the cross-complaint. It was 30 pages of dense legalese, outlining the skimming, the falsified ledgers, the selective enforcement, and the personal enrichment. We filed it with the court the next day, and I made sure a copy was delivered by process server to Brenda's house. The effect was electric. Within hours, the neighborhood gossip network, which usually dealt in lawn care failures, was buzzing with the news. "Leo is suing Brenda." The dynamic shifted. People I hadn't spoken to in months gave me covert thumbs up. The fear was turning, slowly, into a fragile hope. Brenda's response was not legal. It was social. She launched a whisper campaign. I heard from Sarah, who heard from a friend, that Brenda was telling people I was mentally unstable, that I was trying to destroy property values because I was upside down on my mortgage, that I had a grudge because she'd rejected my inappropriate advances. The lies were vile, but they were a sign of weakness. She was fighting with gossip because the legal ground was crumbling beneath her. Then, she made her move on Carl. I saw his car leave abruptly one afternoon. He returned an hour later, looking shaken. He called me, his voice trembling. She cornered me after the grocery store. She had the foreclosure notice. She said she knew I signed it. She said if I didn't call an emergency board meeting to vote to rescind the lien and the foreclosure, she would reveal that I'd been embezzling too, that she had proof I'd taken money to fix violation records for people. It was a brilliant counter-blackmail. Of course, she had no proof, but the accusation alone would destroy Carl in the court of neighborhood opinion. He was terrified. What do I do, Leo? I can't have that said about me. Call the meeting, Carl, I said, an idea forming. Call it for Thursday night. At the community clubhouse. Not her living room. A public space. But she'll force a vote. She'll have Patricia in her pocket. Just call the meeting, I repeated. Send the email to all homeowners. Make the agenda item. Discussion of lien filed against property at 4221 Maple Crest Drive and related financial review. Send it to everyone. I had 1 week. I spent it knocking on doors. Not to argue, but to inform. I carried copies of the lien, the foreclosure notice, and a simple, 1-page summary of the financial discrepancies from Carl's file. I didn't ask people to take my side. I just said, you should see this. You have a right to know what's happening with your money and your board. Most people took the papers wordlessly, their eyes wide. Some shut the door in my face. A few thanked me. The night of the meeting arrived. The small clubhouse was packed. Standing room only. A tension in the air you could taste. Brenda sat at the front table, flanked by a pale, silent Patricia. Carl sat apart, looking sick. Brenda gavelled the meeting to order, her smile brittle. She tried to stick to a bland agenda about lawn errati schedules, but the room was simmering. Finally, she couldn't avoid it. "We have one item of new business," she said, her voice clipped. "A procedural matter regarding a lien. The vice president has unfortunately filed some incorrect paperwork. We need a board vote to rescind it and correct our records." I stood up from the back of the room. My voice cut through the quiet. "A point of order, Madam President. Before a vote, shouldn't there be discussion? And shouldn't the homeowner in question, you, recuse yourself due to a massive conflict of interest?" Every head turned to me. Brenda's eyes were lasers. "You are out of order, Mr. Vance. This is board business." "It's our business," a voice called out from the crowd. It was Mr. Henderson, the man fined for his newspaper. "We all got your notice about the meeting. We want to know what's going on." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Brenda was losing control. She tried to regain it with authority. "The lien is a mistake. I have been in constant payment compliance. The board will vote to correct it now. All in favor?" Patricia's hand shot up. Carl didn't move. He stared at the table. "Carl?" Brenda's voice was icy. Carl looked up, not at her, but at the room full of his neighbors. He saw the expectant faces, the held breath. He saw me, nodding slightly. He took a deep, shaky breath. I filed the lien because the payments weren't made," he said, his voice gaining strength. "The records show it. And I think, before we vote on anything, the homeowners deserve a full, independent audit of all our HOA finances. From the last 5 years." The room exploded. An audit. It was the one thing Brenda could never allow. It would be her ruin. Brenda's composure shattered. "This is an insurrection. You can't just demand an audit." "Actually, we can," I said, raising my voice over the din. "According to the bylaws, a petition signed by 20% of homeowners can force a special meeting for a vote on an independent audit." I reached into my folder and pulled out a sheaf of papers. "I have that petition right here, with 40% of the neighborhood's signatures." I hadn't been just informing people that week. I'd been collecting signatures. The room buzzed with shock and excitement. Brenda looked from me to the petition to the hostile crowd. For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. Not anger, but the fear of someone watching their empire crack apart. So, what happens next? Does the audit vote pass? What does Brenda do when the walls close in? And with her 30-day cure period on the foreclosure ticking down, does she find the money to pay, or does she double down? Let me know what you think her next desperate move will be. Part next is where the empire strikes back, or finally falls.
Subscribe.
Brenda didn't scream. She didn't cry. She did something far more dangerous. She went quiet. In the chaotic clubhouse, after I presented the petition, she simply gathered her papers, stood up, and without a word, walked out. The slam of the door echoed like a gunshot in the sudden silence. Her retreat wasn't surrender. It was a tactical withdrawal. She was regrouping. And I knew, with cold certainty, that her next move wouldn't be at a meeting. It would be in the dark. The 30-day cure period on her foreclosure was halfway gone. The audit vote was scheduled. She was cornered, and a cornered animal doesn't follow rules. It claws its way out. With Brenda gone, the meeting dissolved into a kind of giddy, nervous anarchy. Carl, emboldened by the crowd, took charge. He scheduled the vote on the independent audit for 2 weeks later. It was a formality. With the petition signatures, it would pass. The mood in the neighborhood was a strange mix of liberation and anxiety. The tyrant was wounded, but not yet dethroned. Violation notices ceased entirely. It was the quietest Maple Crest had been in years, and the silence was unnerving. I hired a security camera, a small, discreet one for my front door. It felt paranoid, but Brenda's silent exit had spooked me. Sarah thought I was being obsessive, but she'd seen the lawsuit papers. She was scared too. The first sign of Brenda's new strategy was subtle. A for sale sign appeared in old Mr. Henderson's yard. Then, 2 days later, at the Millers down the street. Both were homeowners who had spoken up at the meeting, who had signed the audit petition. When I asked Mr. Henderson about it, he seemed bewildered. Got a full-price cash offer, out of the blue, from some investment company. Closing in 30 days. Can't say no in this market. It was a purge. Brenda, or someone connected to her, was buying out her opposition, removing votes from the homeowner roll right before the audit vote. It was clean, legal, and devastatingly smart. If she could flip enough houses to sympathetic owners, or better yet, to LLCs that would vote with her, she could maintain control. The cash offers were a weapon we couldn't fight. We were homeowners, not real estate moguls. My lawyer, Maya, confirmed my fear. If the ownership changes before the vote, the new owners get the voting rights. If they're shell companies, they'll vote how their paperwork tells them to. She's trying to rig the electorate.
We were in a race against time.
The audit vote was in 14 days. The foreclosure cure period ended in 15. 2 clocks, ticking down to the same moment of reckoning. Then, the pressure turned directly on me. I got a call from my mortgage company. A routine review, they said. But the questions weren't routine. They asked about the lawsuit filed against me by the HOA. They asked if there were any ongoing disputes that could affect property value or my ability to pay. Someone had tipped them off. The lawsuit, though frivolous, was now a black mark on my financial profile. Brenda was using the system as always to squeeze me. Worse came that evening. I was reviewing the audit petition list when my doorbell rang. It was past 9. On the security camera app, I saw a man I didn't recognize. Late 40s, wearing a cheap suit. He didn't look like a neighbor. I didn't answer. He left a business card wedged in the door. It read, Elias Finch, Finch and Associates Resolution Services. On the back, handwritten, we can make the lawsuit disappear. Call me. It was an offer to settle. A bribe wrapped in a threat. I showed it to Maya. They're getting nervous, she said. The foreclosure deadline is looming. They want you to drop everything in exchange for dropping the suit. If you say no, they'll probably escalate the legal harassment. What's the escalation? I asked. They could seek a temporary restraining order, alleging harassment, to keep you away from HOA meetings or other homeowners. It would be nonsense, but it would create more legal headaches, more cost. It's death by 1,000 paper cuts. I couldn't fight on all fronts. The lawsuit, the vote buying, the mortgage pressure, the mysterious resolution man. I was running out of energy and money. The cold, strategic rage that had fueled me was giving way to a grinding fatigue. I was just one guy. She was a system. That's when I got the idea. If Brenda was using the system, I needed to find a bigger system.
I went back to the state statutes.
I looked beyond HOA law to contractor licensing, to banking regulations, to real estate disclosure laws. And I found it. A provision regarding fraudulent conveyance and bad faith actions by parties in a legal dispute. If Brenda was secretly behind the cash offers to buy out her neighbors, using HOA funds or funneling money through a shell, it could be illegal. But proving it was impossible for me. I needed a professional, not a lawyer, a forensic accountant. I called Maya and asked if she knew anyone. She gave me a name, David Chun. He was expensive, but he worked on contingency for cases with potential for large fraud recoveries. I sent him everything. The HOA financials, the list of sudden cash sales, the lawsuit, the foreclosure lien. I laid out my theory. Brenda was using stolen HOA funds to buy votes to stop an audit that would expose her theft. David called me 2 days later. His voice was calm, intrigued. The financial records are a mess, but there's a pattern. Small, regular withdrawals labeled legal/contractor that don't correspond to any known contracts. The timing of the cash offers is highly suspicious, right after the audit petition. It's not proof, but it's a scent. More importantly, he continued, I ran the LLC that made the offer on Henderson's house. It's a single asset entity. Its registered agent is a law firm. And that law firm's biggest client, in this county, is a real estate development company owned by a Stephen Brenshaw. Brenda's brother. It was a connection. A thin one, but a connection. What can we do? I asked, feeling a flicker of hope. We can file a complaint with the state's real estate commission, David said, alleging fraudulent activity and coercion in a real estate transaction to influence a community vote. It will trigger an investigation. Investigations are slow, but they freeze things. They create discovery. And they scare people. The buyers, the brother, Brenda, they won't want that kind of scrutiny. We filed the complaint. The next day, the for sale sign on Mr. Henderson's lawn came down. The cash offer was withdrawn due to unforeseen circumstances. Brenda's purge had been halted, at least temporarily. But the core issue remained, her foreclosure. The cure period was down to 5 days. Carl, as acting president in the conflict, had the authority to accept payment. I watched her house, like a hawk. No express mail trucks. No sign of her scurrying to a bank. She was letting the clock run out.
Why?
Arrogance? Or did she have a plan to stop the foreclosure itself? I found out 3 days before the deadline. Carl called me, his voice shaking. She filed an injunction. In court. She's suing the HOA to stop the foreclosure. My mind reeled. She's suing herself? No, Carl said. She's suing the rogue faction of the HOA. Meaning me and by extension you. She's claiming the lien and the foreclosure notice are invalid because they weren't authorized by a full board vote and that I acted out of personal malice. She's asking the judge for a temporary restraining order to stop the foreclosure process until the lawsuit is resolved. It was a delay tactic. A brilliant one. If a judge granted the TRO, the foreclosure clock would stop. She could drag the lawsuit out for months or years, staying in her house, while we bled money on legal fees. She was using the court to shield herself from the consequences of the very rules she enforced. The hearing for the temporary restraining order was set for the day after her cure period was set to expire. Her timing was perfect. We had to show up in court and convince a judge not to grant it. We had 1 day to prepare. The night before the hearing, I sat at my kitchen table with Maya, Carl, and a printout of the injunction filing. Brenda's argument was simple: due process. She claimed she never received proper notice of the delinquency, a lie, that Carl was a disgruntled former friend with a vendetta, and that foreclosing over a minor bookkeeping dispute was an extreme and punitive abuse of power. She had affidavits from a few neighbors, the ones still loyal or terrified, attesting to my disruptive behavior and Carl's unstable demeanor. It was a masterful piece of legal theater, painting herself as the victim of a neighborhood coup. Our argument is simpler, Maya said, circling a line in the state law. The HOA covenants give the board the power to levy assessments and foreclose for non-payment. The lien was filed. The notice was sent. The debt is real and unpaid. Her personal disputes with board members don't erase the debt. The judge isn't being asked to rule on her character, but on a contract. She didn't pay. The contract says this is the consequence. It was a cold, procedural argument. Would it be enough to overcome her emotional victim narrative? The hearing was at 9 a.m. We would have 10 minutes to make our case. So, what do you think happens? Does the judge see through Brenda's act and let the foreclosure proceed, or does he grant the restraining order, giving her a lifeline? The fate of Maple Crest Estates hinges on a 10-minute hearing. Share your prediction below. The courtroom showdown and the stunning conclusion are in the final part.
Subscribe.
The courtroom was nothing like on TV. It was small, beige, and smelled of old paper and anxiety. Brenda sat at the plaintiff's table with a lawyer, a sleek man in a suit that cost more than my car. She wore a simple, respectable dress, her hands folded neatly. She looked like the picture of a wronged homeowner. We sat at the defendant's table. Me, Carl in his best sweater vest, and Maya. We looked like what we were, amateurs in a fight that had gotten too big. The judge entered, a weary-looking man with sharp eyes. He didn't care about our war. He cared about the law. And in 10 minutes, he would decide if Brenda's kingdom got a stay of execution, or if the rules she'd weaponized would finally consume her. The hearing was a brutal lesson in efficiency. Brenda's lawyer spoke first. His voice was smooth, reasonable. He painted a picture of a long-standing, dedicated community volunteer, Brenda, being ambushed by a rogue element led by a vengeful neighbor, me, and a confused, manipulated board member, Carl. He emphasized the trivial amount of the debt compared to the value of her home. He called the foreclosure draconian, unconscionable, and a clear case of selective enforcement and personal vendetta. He presented the affidavits from the neighbors. He was good. He made our case sound petty and cruel. Then it was Maya's turn. She stood up, her demeanor calm and focused. She didn't talk about vendettas or lawn gnomes.
She talked about contracts.
Your Honor, this is a simple contract dispute, she began, her voice clear in the quiet room. The Maple Crest Estates covenants, which the plaintiff signed and has enforced vigorously against others, grant the HOA the power to levy dues and to place a lien and foreclose for non-payment. A lien was properly filed with the county after months of delinquency. A notice of intent to foreclose was sent by certified mail, as required. The plaintiff admits she received it. The debt remains unpaid. The association is merely following its own governing documents, the same documents the plaintiff has used to levy over $50,000 in fines against other homeowners in the last 3 years. She placed a stack of documents before the judge. These are a sample of violation notices and fines issued under the plaintiff's presidency. For trash cans, for lawn ornaments, for door colors. The plaintiff's argument today is that the rules are too harsh, too punitive. But she never found them too harsh to enforce against everyone else. The only difference here is that she is the subject. The judge flipped through the violation notices, his expression unreadable. Brenda's lawyer objected. Relevance, Your Honor. This is character assassination. It goes to the issue of selective enforcement and good faith, Maya countered. The plaintiff is asking for equitable relief, a restraining order. She must come to this court with clean hands. We submit that her hands are not clean. She has wielded these covenants as a weapon. Now she cries foul when their blade points her way. The judge held up a hand, silencing the lawyer's next protest. He looked at Brenda. Ms. Brenshaw, did you or did you not receive the notice of intent to foreclose? Brenda leaned into the microphone. I did, Your Honor, but it was part of a campaign of harassment. And is the debt outstanding? Have you paid the past 8 months of HOA dues? She hesitated. There's a dispute about the amount. The bookkeeping. Have you paid any dues in the last 8 months? The judge pressed, his tone impatient. No, Your Honor. And are you familiar with the covenant provision that allows for foreclosure after 90 days of delinquency? Yes, but... Thank you. The judge turned back to Maya and then to Brenda's lawyer. I've heard enough. This isn't a complex case. The association has a contractual right to collect dues. A member is delinquent. The association followed its procedure. The member's personal disputes with the board do not void the debt or the contract. He paused, letting the words sink into the silent room. Brenda's confident facade finally cracked. A muscle in her jaw twitched. The request for a temporary restraining order is denied, the judge said, banging his gavel with a soft thunk. The foreclosure process may proceed according to the association schedule. Next case. It was over. In less than 10 minutes. No dramatic speech. Just the cold, impersonal application of a rule. The very thing Brenda had lived by. The irony was so perfect it was almost cruel. We walked out of the courtroom into the bright hallway. Brenda and her lawyer swept past us without a word, her face a stone mask. Carl was trembling, but with relief. Maya allowed herself a small, tight smile. One battle won, she said. The war's not over. She'll appeal, she'll file more motions. But she can't stop the clock now. The foreclosure sale can be scheduled. The following weeks were a tense, procedural march. With the TRO denied, the HOA, with Carl now firmly in charge and Patricia having resigned, scheduled a foreclosure auction for Brenda's property. It was set for 60 days out, as required by law. Notices were posted in the newspaper and on her door. Brenda didn't go quietly. She launched a final, scorched earth campaign. Flyers appeared in mailboxes accusing me of being a socialist trying to destroy private property rights. She called the county, filing complaints about my house for things that didn't exist: an unpermitted shed, toxic runoff. All were investigated and dismissed, but they were a nuisance. But the momentum had irreversibly shifted. The audit vote passed overwhelmingly. The independent auditor, a stern woman with no patience for nonsense, took possession of all HOA records. Her preliminary report, issued a month later, confirmed everything: skimming, falsified expenses, and a complete lack of financial controls. The report was sent to every homeowner and to the district attorney's office. A criminal investigation was opened. The day before the foreclosure auction, Brenda packed a U-Haul. She didn't say goodbye to anyone. She just loaded her perfectly curated belongings and drove away. She didn't wait for the gavel to fall. She surrendered. The bank that held her mortgage ultimately bought the house at the foreclosure auction to satisfy the HOA's lien. It went up for sale a month later. A young family bought it. They painted the front door a bright, cheerful yellow without asking anyone's permission. The lawsuits slowly dissolved. Without Brenda to push them, the HOA dropped its case against me. My cross-complaint was settled with the HOA's insurance, resulting in a small payment to me and a formal agreement that expunged all the fines she had levied against me and several other homeowners. The state's investigation into the fraud is ongoing, but Brenda, I heard, moved to another state to live with her brother. Carl became the interim HOA president. The first thing the new board did was vote to revise the covenants, stripping away the petty, subjective rules and focusing on real property maintenance and community events. The violation notices became a thing of folklore, a scary story neighbors told. I won. I got my revenge. The petty tyrant was overthrown. But the victory tasted different than I'd imagined. There was no cheering crowd, just a quiet neighborhood slowly healing. My relationship with Sarah was strained. The stress had taken a toll. My savings were decimated by legal costs, even with the settlement. And sometimes, walking my dog past Brenda's old house, now alive with the sound of kids playing in the once forbidden yard, I'd feel a strange hollowness. I'd become as obsessive, as relentless as she was. I'd just been on the right side of the rules. The twist wasn't in beating her. The twist was in what it cost to win, and in the quiet realization that the neighborhood's real problem wasn't one woman. It was the system of fear and petty power we'd all allowed to flourish. I had used the system to break her, but the system itself was the real enemy. And that was a much harder fight. So, was it worth it? For my pride, for justice, yes. For my bank account and my peace, maybe not. The micro-niche here isn't just bureaucratic revenge. It's the cost of that revenge. It's about what happens when you have to become a monster to fight a monster, and whether you can ever fully come back. Brenda was a symptom. The HOA rulebook, wielded without humanity, was the disease. We cured the symptom. The disease requires constant vigilance. Have you ever been in a fight where winning felt almost as bad as losing? Where you had to become someone you didn't like to defeat someone you hated? Share your story in the comments. The messy, complicated victories are the ones we actually learn from. And if this story of suburban warfare resonated with you, share it with someone trapped in their own HOA nightmare. Sometimes, the first step to winning is knowing the rules better than the person who wrote them. Thanks for listening.